I feel like I want to cry.
Why?
Just because it's like, it gives me anxiety. Sometimes I'm just like, it makes you really like analyze just like where you're at. And then I'm like, sometimes like, what am I doing?
You've got to find a light in your life. And it breaks my heart to see you in pain.
From, you know, my drug addiction to the plane crash, everything had like a great outcome, you know, or as good as it could, whereas when you and I were first scheduled to talk, I wasn't in a good place.
There are moments in celebrity drama when you can feel the air shift. When a breakup stops being just a breakup, and suddenly you're staring at a full-blown legal war that nobody saw coming. That's exactly what's happening right now between Travis Barker and Kourtney Kardashian, and the people close to them say this didn't come out of nowhere. What looks like a simple dispute over property might actually be the peak of a much deeper, messier story that's been simmering for months behind the scenes. And what really pushed Travis to file a lawsuit is a lot more personal than fans realize. Because here's the truth, when someone reaches the point where they're ready to take the person they loved, the person they defended publicly, stood by during scandals, protected from online backlash, and dragged that entire relationship into a courtroom, something has snapped, something big. And with Travis, insiders say they've never seen him this drained, this cornered, or this determined to reclaim control over his own life. The lawsuit might sound like one single event, but it's actually connected to a chain of emotional blows, financial pressure, and personal betrayals that stacked up slowly until he simply couldn't ignore them anymore. And the craziest part? The property sale that triggered everything wasn't even the most shocking moment. There were warning signs, changes in body language, sudden financial gaps nobody could explain, arguments that friends said were getting too intense, and a moment in court that stunned everyone in the room. That moment is what people believe finally broke Travis down, the one thing that made him realize he couldn't keep pretending things were fine. In this video, we're breaking down exactly how their relationship slipped into legal chaos, what pushed Travis to take action, and the hidden details that might explain why this situation exploded the way it did. And trust me, once you see the full picture, the lawsuit won't be the part that shocks you most. When people look at Travis and Kourtney, they usually remember the early days. The red carpet PDA, the matching outfits, the blended family dinners, the fairy tale energy that made everyone think they were the one couple in that universe who might actually escape the Kardashian curse. But behind those polished moments, the cracks started forming much earlier than fans realize. And the people who were around them during that first year say the warning signs were subtle at first, but they were definitely there. It began with something small: expectations. Kourtney has always been protective of her personal space, routines, and boundaries. Travis, on the other hand, moves fast. He loves intensely. He gets attached quickly and doesn't hide his emotions. At the beginning, that energy felt exciting. It made their relationship look effortless. But once the honeymoon phase faded, their differences in communication started clashing. Travis wanted transparency about everything: finances, travel, family involvement, while Kourtney preferred keeping certain things private, especially when it came to her long-standing agreements with her own family. Then came the conversations about money, not because either of them was struggling, but because they approached it completely differently. Travis was more open about his spending and investments, while Kourtney had a tighter, more controlled way of managing her assets. Friends say this created uncomfortable moments, especially when Travis began dealing with legal and financial stress. He expected them to handle it as a team. Kourtney, on the other hand, didn't like being pulled into high-risk decisions that weren't originally hers. Another tension point was family. Travis naturally blended his kids into everything: dinners, events, vacations, but Kourtney struggled to balance her loyalty to her ex, her kids' schedules, and the expectations of such a public relationship. These awkward overlaps became more common, and insiders say those moments left Travis confused and Kourtney overwhelmed. By the time things escalated later, these small issues weren't small anymore. They were the foundation of a relationship already under pressure, a pressure neither of them fully admitted until it was too late. As the tension in their relationship slowly built, Travis found himself dealing with a completely different battle, one that had nothing to do with love or family, but everything to do with the kind of pressure that can break even the strongest person. Long before any lawsuit was filed, he was already juggling legal obligations, old financial responsibilities, and the fallout from choices he made years before he ever imagined being tied to the Kardashian machine. And while much of this wasn't public, it was affecting him every single day. Travis has always been open about the mistakes he made earlier in life, the addictions, the losses, the trauma, and the way those experiences followed him long after the public stopped talking about them. What most people didn't know, though, was how expensive it was to maintain those ongoing legal responsibilities. Fines, settlements, negotiations, they weren't destroying him, but they definitely weren't easy. And when one particular probation-related cost resurfaced at the worst possible time, it threw his entire financial stability off balance. This is where the dynamic between him and Kourtney really began to shift. Travis expected emotional support, and in many ways, Kourtney tried to give it. But when finances entered the conversation, the tone changed. She didn't want to be responsible for decisions she hadn't made, and she didn't want to gamble with assets her family had guarded for decades. Travis, on the other hand, felt cornered. He didn't have many options, and the pressure of dealing with this alone was starting to wear him down. Friends say this is when he began leaning on Kourtney more than usual, not out of weakness, but out of fear that one wrong decision would spiral into something irreversible. And that's where misunderstandings started snowballing. What Travis saw as, "we're in this together," Kourtney saw as, "you're pulling me into chaos I didn't create." This imbalance, emotional, financial, and psychological, is what set the stage for everything that came next. The property issue wasn't random. It was born out of a moment where both of them felt trapped, but neither knew how to admit it. The breaking point in every relationship usually starts with one moment that feels small at first, a decision that doesn't seem catastrophic until everything around it begins to collapse. For Travis and Kourtney, that moment was the property issue. Not the lawsuit itself, not the paperwork, not even the accusation, but the conversation that started it all. And according to people who saw things unfold, this wasn't just a financial disagreement. It was the moment they realized they were no longer on the same side of the field. By the time Travis found himself overwhelmed by legal costs, he had already run through most of his immediate options. Selling a property wasn't dramatic. It was logical. It's what most people would do. And at first, the idea seemed straightforward. Unload a piece of real estate, pay off part of the remaining obligations, calm things down, and move forward. Kourtney even appeared supportive. And that made sense, because at that stage, they still believed they could fix things if they worked together. But the problem wasn't the property itself. It was ownership, control, and the lack of clarity behind who was responsible for what. Some of the assets Travis held were tied to older contracts and separate agreements. Some had emotional value. Some had complicated co-ownership structures. And when Kourtney stepped in to help, the lines became blurry. What was meant as a cooperative effort suddenly started looking like a business decision being handled without Travis fully present. This is where the misunderstandings exploded. A sale was initiated, but Travis didn't feel like he had full visibility. Documents were exchanged, decisions were made quickly, and when he finally looked at what had actually happened, he felt blindsided. Not because the property was sold, but because he didn't understand who had taken charge, why certain choices were made, and how money from the sale was handled. Friends say Travis felt out of control. Kourtney felt accused. Both felt misunderstood. And instead of stepping back and clarifying things, the tension turned into silence, the kind that makes people assume the worst. That silence is what eventually turned a property decision into the spark of a legal war. This is the part of the story where everything that had been simmering in the background finally boiled over. The property sale alone wasn't enough to end a relationship. Couples go through financial decisions all the time. What pushed Travis over the edge was what happened after the sale, when he realized the situation wasn't as simple as he believed. According to people close to him, what he expected was transparency. What he got instead felt like a puzzle full of missing pieces, and each missing detail made him fear he'd lost control of his own life. When the funds from the property were supposed to land, the numbers didn't match what Travis anticipated. There were gaps, delays, and explanations that didn't fully settle his concerns. And in a moment where he was already overwhelmed with legal pressure, health stress, and emotional exhaustion, those gaps looked like something far more serious. Not because there was definitive proof of wrongdoing, but because he felt kept in the dark during a moment when he needed clarity the most. That's what hurt him deeply. The idea that the person he trusted might have made decisions without him. The idea that money tied to his name and his responsibilities was now part of a situation he couldn't fully understand. And when he learned that Kourtney had traveled unexpectedly and taken their child with her at the same time these financial questions were surfacing, he didn't see it as coincidence. He saw distance. He saw avoidance. He saw a sign that something between them had shifted in a direction he didn't know how to control. Friends say this was the night Travis shut down emotionally, not because of the money, but because he suddenly felt isolated in a relationship that was supposed to be a partnership. He didn't know where Kourtney stood. He didn't know why she wasn't communicating clearly. And he didn't know how to fix something when he couldn't even pinpoint where the breakdown started. This confusion, mixed with fear and deep frustration, is what finally pushed him to consider legal action. It wasn't revenge, it was desperation. An attempt to get answers when every conversation kept turning into another argument or another wall. Just when the tension between Travis and Kourtney was reaching its peak, life hit them with something neither of them was prepared for. Travis's hospitalization wasn't just another headline or a random health scare. It was the moment everything that had been spiraling behind closed doors suddenly became impossible to ignore. One day he was trying to figure out his finances, his relationship, and the growing sense that things were slipping out of his control. And the next, he was in the back of an ambulance, overwhelmed with pain and unable to pretend he was okay. People online saw the surface-level details: the rushed transport between hospitals, the worried posts from his daughter Alabama, the cryptic messages on his social media. What they didn't see was how emotionally fragile Travis already was before he even stepped into that emergency room. He had been dealing with stress for months: legal pressure, relationship confusion, public scrutiny. And when the physical symptoms hit, they hit hard. Severe stomach pain, nausea that wouldn't stop, a sudden fear that something inside him was shutting down. Kourtney showed up, and from the outside, it looked supportive. But inside that hospital room, the dynamic was different. Their relationship was already on shaky ground. And now they were forced to face each other in one of the most vulnerable moments of his life. Travis wanted comfort. Kourtney wanted stability, and both of them were carrying unspoken frustration that neither knew how to express in that setting. Meanwhile, his older children kept their distance, believing Travis had put himself in this position. Their absence hurt him more than he ever admitted publicly. It made him feel abandoned at a time when he needed his family to stand with him, not away from him. This medical crisis didn't start the downfall, but it accelerated everything. It made Travis realize how fragile his life had become. It made Kourtney question whether she could keep carrying the emotional weight of their situation. And it created a new layer of urgency that pushed this already strained relationship closer to its breaking point. What happened next, in court, was the moment no one could have predicted. The court hearing was supposed to be routine. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. Just another procedural step in Travis's attempt to get his legal situation under control. He walked in that morning exhausted, still recovering from his hospital stay, and hoping things might finally start moving in the right direction. Instead, what happened inside that courtroom would become the moment friends say broke something inside him for good. Travis expected to show up alone or with his attorney. What he didn't expect was to see Kourtney walk in, not only unexpectedly, but with Scott Disick beside her. To outsiders, it might seem harmless. The Kardashians and Disick have been intertwined for years, so their appearance together wasn't shocking on its own. But to Travis, in that moment, it felt like a punch he never saw coming. Witnesses who were in the room say the atmosphere changed instantly. Kourtney and Scott were talking quietly, occasionally laughing, and at one point leaning close enough that it caught the attention of more than just Travis. It wasn't wild PDA or anything disrespectful. It was the familiarity, the comfort, the subtle, we've known each other forever energy that made Travis feel like an outsider in his own crisis. And that hurt him more than any headline ever could. He was standing there, facing legal consequences, financial pressure, and the emotional fallout of months of tension, while the woman he believed would support him showed up with the one person who symbolized her past, her history, and the complicated family ties he never fully fit into. It was a reminder that no matter how close he thought he was to that world, he was never truly part of it. People who saw Travis said his expression changed instantly, from focused to shaken. He wasn't angry, he was stunned, confused, embarrassed. It was the kind of emotional hit that drains the strength right out of you. And that's when everything shifted. The moment the paperwork was filed, the moment misunderstanding turned into legal action, the moment Travis decided he needed answers, even if that meant fighting in court to get them. Once the court hearing was over, something inside Travis shifted completely. Up until that point, he had been trying, sometimes quietly, sometimes desperately, to keep things from exploding. He wanted conversations, clarity, and reassurance. But standing in that courtroom while everything felt out of his control made him realize something he had been avoiding for months. If he didn't take action, nobody was going to do it for him. And that's when his frustration turned into something more decisive. The lawsuit wasn't impulsive, it wasn't revenge. It was the first moment in this entire downward spiral where Travis felt like he had a way to regain some power. His legal team walked him through what wrongful sale actually meant. And according to sources familiar with the filing, Travis didn't care about making anyone look bad. He cared about getting transparency. He wanted a record of every decision that was made, who approved what, and why he was left confused about money tied to his own name. From his perspective, the property situation wasn't just a misunderstanding. It felt like a breakdown in trust that he couldn't ignore anymore. So he took the one route that would force everything into the open. He filed the lawsuit, but that wasn't the only step. The CPS-related filing shocked fans even more. But for Travis, it was tied to the same fear: losing control over the parts of his life that mattered most. The sudden travel, the confusion around the property funds, the lack of communication. It left him feeling like decisions involving his child were happening without him. Whether those fears were exaggerated by stress or grounded in real concerns didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was that he felt powerless, and filing that case was his way of trying to protect himself and his family. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Some people sided with him, believing he had been pushed too far. Others defended Kourtney, insisting the story was being blown out of proportion. But everyone agreed on one thing: this was no longer a simple breakup or a household dispute. This was a full legal war. And as the filings became public, the entertainment world realized this wasn't even the end. It was just the beginning of a much bigger fallout. Once the legal filings became public, the ripple effect hit every part of Travis's life. This wasn't just a relationship issue anymore. It became a situation that touched his family, his friendships, and even his career. And for someone who spent years rebuilding himself after trauma, accidents, and personal losses, this was the kind of multi-layered collapse he had tried so hard to avoid. The first fallout came from his older kids. They had always loved their father, but their relationship wasn't without complications. When the tension between Travis and Kourtney began affecting their routines, their schedules, and the constant back and forth of blended family dynamics, they grew distant. So when news broke about the legal dispute, they didn't rush to his side. They didn't show up at the hospital. They didn't message him publicly. Instead, they pulled away, convinced that he was making decisions that were spiraling out of control. That emotional distance hit Travis harder than any headline. It felt like losing pieces of his foundation. Then came the professional strain. Blink-182 had always been more than a band. It was the one stable force that carried him through some of the darkest moments of his life. But even that started feeling shaky. His bandmates weren't cold, but they also weren't stepping into his personal storm. They had their own lives, their own responsibilities, and they didn't want to get entangled in a situation they barely understood. They refused to cover remaining legal costs, and they quietly encouraged him to take time off. It wasn't rejection, but it felt like abandonment. And with that, his career entered an unexpected freeze. Shows were rescheduled, collaborations paused, studios he normally felt at home and suddenly felt overwhelming. He wasn't the confident, unstoppable drummer the public knew. He was a man who had reached emotional exhaustion. The saddest part is that Travis didn't see any of this coming. He thought he was holding it together well enough. He thought he could fix things. But the combination of legal pressure, family tension, and professional uncertainty created a storm he couldn't navigate alone. And that's where the real story ends. Not with a scandal, not with a villain, but with two people who reached a breaking point and a man trying to rebuild his life one piece at a time. What makes this entire situation so complicated is that there isn't a clear ending. There's no final ruling, no public reconciliation, no explosive press conference that ties everything together. Instead, Travis and Kourtney are caught in the kind of quiet, painful limbo that happens when two people who once trusted each other suddenly find themselves on opposite sides of a courtroom. And the truth is, neither of them expected things to escalate this far. Not the legal filings, not the custody concerns, not the emotional distance that grew between them piece by piece. For Travis, this chapter of his life feels like a test of everything he's built over the years. His recovery, his career, his family, all of it depends on finding stability again. And whether people agree with the steps he's taking or not, it's clear he reached a point where silence wasn't helping him anymore. He wanted answers. He wanted control. He wanted to feel like his life belonged to him again, not to lawyers, not to assumptions, and not to a relationship that had become too heavy for either of them to carry. Kourtney, on the other hand, is dealing with a storm she didn't ask for. While she's been painted as the villain in some conversations, those close to her insist the situation is far more nuanced. They say she made decisions she believed were right at the time. They say she never intended to hurt him. And they say the pressure of balancing her own life, her children, her work, and her relationships pushed her into choices she didn't fully think through. So where does that leave them now? Some fans believe Travis will eventually recover and rebuild stronger than before. Others think this legal battle will drag on, revealing more layers we haven't seen yet. But most people agree on one thing: this story is far from over. And maybe that's why it resonates so much. It's not just celebrity drama. It's two human beings who loved each other, hurt each other, and are now trying to make sense of the fallout. Let me know what you think. Is Travis justified in taking legal action? Or is this a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control? Drop your thoughts below, subscribe for more updates, and stay tuned, because we're definitely not at the end of this story yet.